Ladies and gentlemen, I'm delighted to welcome you to the final event of our summer exhibition, which has already been attended by more than 10,000 people, and you haven't been counted yet. And I'd like to say that my name is Martin Polyakov. I'm the Foreign Secretary and one of the Vice Presidents of the Society. And it's wonderful to be here, to welcome you, and also to host this event that has been organized by Dr. Julia Knights and her colleagues from the British Embassy in Moscow. So before we begin, I would like to ask His Excellency Tim Barrow, the British Ambassador in Moscow, to say a few words.
Thank you, everyone. One of the things you learn quickly in the job of being an ambassador is that you often get to talk to crowds who want to hear somebody else. So I'm going to be brief because the stars of the show are here. I'd just like to thank you all for coming. I was told just a couple of moments ago that we have an excellent turnout of astrophysicists. I don't know how you're identified as that, and I don't know what the collective term for astrophysicists is, but you are welcome, and everybody else is welcome too, to this joint presentation between us in the British Embassy, and particularly my Science and Innovation Centre section, and the Royal Society, and thank you very much to Professor Martin Polyakov. Before I turn my attention briefly to the event today, can I just take the opportunity, on behalf, I'm sure, of all of you, to pass through our Russian friends and colleagues our respects and condolences for the loss of life which Russia has just suffered in floods which they have been experiencing. We have had our floods here. They've had very serious flooding down the south, and over 150 people have died. So I'm sure you'll want to join me in passing our respect and condolences to the families and the victims. This event is in many ways a continuation of the year which we established from the Embassy, the UK-Russia Year of Space. And I have to say I was a little sceptical when this was suggested, because it seemed to me that the Russian space program was a little further ahead in some ways than ours. But I was wrong. In fact, it's an excellent area of innovation and cooperation. And in the course of that year, we have signed a space medicine treaty and joint research on crew psychology for a manned mission to Mars. You'll see all about that. We've had a joint nano and micro satellite flying in tandem to predict earthquakes. We've had £4.2 million of British immersive theatre technology at the Moscow Planetarium. And if you visit Moscow, go to the planetarium. It is excellent. And we have also done research in fluids in microgravity at the International Space Station. I'm particularly grateful to Julia that I'm speaking here in the UK, because normally she makes me say all that in Russian, and fluids in microgravity in Russian is not much fun to say. So I'm sure that you will be as inspired, informed, and entertained by today's talk as I was when, as a young diplomat, I was able to go, while Helen was training, up to Star City and meet the cosmonauts in training and the cosmonauts who had flown missions before. And if you find yourself in that situation, you certainly know a bit about your place in the world. These are remarkable people, and this will be a remarkable talk today. If you are inspired, please look at what else we are doing through the Science and Innovation section in the Embassy. We have a raft of Space Science Cafe lectures planned in Russia, and I hope that some of you will be able to participate in one way or another, or indeed, if we do have all these astrophysicists in the audience, you can volunteer to be part of our next lecture series. So please enjoy this evening, and thank you again for the opportunity. Thank you.
So our main program this evening is that we have two extremely well-known and famous astronauts, or I'm sorry, cosmonauts. And there's Helen Sharman, who was the first Briton to go into space, and she flew in space in 1991 with a Russian crew, which included Anatoly Artsebarsky, who is going to speak second. So the program will begin first with Helen, then with Anatoly, and then finish with you having an opportunity to ask questions. So you should be thinking of questions now, you see, so that we get a lively discussion. And one thing that I would like to say is that I'm a chemist. You can see I'm wearing a chemistry tie. And it gives me great pleasure to say that Helen, the first British cosmonaut, is also a chemist. So, Helen. I should also say for all of you that this session is being recorded, so you will be able to listen to what you say, but you must bear in mind when you're saying the things that they will be recorded for posterity.
Thank you. Ambassador, ladies and gentlemen, what a week for the Royal Society. It has been absolutely fabulous. I understand hundreds and hundreds of scientists and other people have come through the doors. I'd just like to say congratulations, first of all. Not only has it been great for science this week, but it's actually been great for me because this has given me the chance to meet Tolya here, because we don't often get the chance to meet anymore. 21 years ago, we were really so close that we did everything we needed to do, and I mean everything we needed to do, in the same room as each other. And you know, time goes by, and we don't often get such a chance to meet anymore. This is the first time we've actually met in London, and this is our first real presentation that we've made together. So delighted I am to be able to do that with Tolya today. So yes, I am going to start off, and I'm going to tell you really just what it's like being in space. So I'm not going to talk astrophysics, so I hope I don't disappoint too many people with that. But I would like, if you don't mind, just to bring in some of the aspects of science, because as far as I'm concerned, science is all around us all the time. You can't do anything without it. Most of the time we don't think about it. But when you're in space, you have to know about it in order just to stay alive. But let me give you a picture, first of all. This is a picture of Star City, where His Excellency said he came to visit me when I was doing my training. This is a picture I did take 21 years ago. It hasn't changed an awful lot since then. It's a few kilometers northeast of Moscow. A military base it was then for all the cosmonauts, their trainers. People lived there. There was 3,500 people live in Star City. And this is where I first learnt Russian. So, of course, I arrived in Russia to begin my training, having been a scientist. I was a chemist, a scientist in British industry. I didn't speak Russian. And when we arrived, we were given a Russian teacher, of course, so that we could understand what the training was going to be, because all the training was going to be done in Russian. And our teacher walked into the front of the classroom. There were two of us doing the training. One would become backup, and one would be actually the person flying into space in the end. And the teacher walked into the front of the classroom, and he announced himself to us by saying, "Bonjour, je m'appelle Igor." And we figured out that, well, actually, Igor had taught the French cosmonaut how to speak Russian, and he'd picked up a few words of French along the way, but he didn't know any English. So that was how we started. But, of course, you pick it up very quickly when you're there. The most fun part of the training was the weightless training. And here I am with a Japanese girl, Ryoko. She became the backup to the mission before mine. And we are actually feeling weightless. You can do it for short periods of time. We did it for 23 seconds each time. Inside a large aircraft, this was an Ilyushin 76, so a huge freighter aircraft. And you can drive tanks into the back of this. And of course, it's totally cleared out of everything. The aircraft flies along, and everybody sits on the floor. And then the pilot makes it describe a loop, a parabolic loop. And as the aircraft gets to the top of this parabola, the pilot just makes it fall down the other side. And because the aircraft is falling, you're falling inside the aircraft. So you feel weightless. Of course, you're not weightless. You're falling. Your gravity is still there, but you feel weightless because everything around you, the air inside the aircraft, is also falling. So you have this few seconds, and it is just a few seconds before, of course, the pilot, who can see out of his window, looking down at the ground rapidly approaching, decides he's going to pull out into a straight line again. And then everybody plops back down on the floor of the aircraft until we do another loop. And the aircraft could do 10 loops at a time because, of course, it affects the oil in the engine. Everything feels weightless for these 23 seconds. That's why we're wearing parachutes on our backs, just in case. But a few of these loops at a time is why the Americans have given the nickname to their aircraft that they use. I'm sure you've heard it called the Vomit Comet, for obvious reasons. But training continued. We had sea training. Now, I'm here wearing my spacesuit, what's somebody else's spacesuit, actually, but the identical one that I'm going to be wearing, jumping out of a mock-up of the re-entry spacecraft and learning how to survive in the sea. Now, we didn't want to come back and land. We didn't want to come back into the sea. We wanted to land on dry land. It's an awful lot of dry land in what was then the Soviet Union, Kazakhstan, nice and flat, easy to land on. Actually, it's quite dangerous ending up in the sea. You might think it's a bit easier because you can dive into the water when you're in a swimming pool. But we didn't want to dive into it. We wanted to come back on the surface. And if you just want to land or end up on something flat like that, well, the sea doesn't absorb much of the energy of that impact. Whereas if you come back onto dry land, you can use your retro rockets to give you a bit of a boost just before you make that final touchdown. And you've got the land itself, which is full of air pockets, and it absorbs some of that energy. So you do actually land softer than if you want to end up in the sea. But because there's a bit more water than there is dry land on the Earth's surface, the sea training was there just in case. And a lot of our training was just in case. 3 months before the flight, the crew was chosen. So Tolya's sitting in the middle here. He's the commander. Sergei is our engineer. He'd been into space before. And I'm the research cosmonaut on the end there. The plan is that we all three launched together. So this was 3 months before the flight that we were chosen. And then we trained very closely with each other. The three of us would launch together. We'd spend 2 days orbiting the Earth inside our Soyuz spacecraft that was on top of the rocket, and then we would dock onto the Mir space station. And when we get there, we meet 2 people who've been up there for 6 months. And I find this really still quite incredible. You know, they've just had each other for company, nobody else for 6 months. So you can imagine, not only were we looking forward to going into space, but they were very much looking forward to us getting there as well. So they'd have a bit more somebody else to talk to while we were up there. So the crew was chosen, the backup crew was chosen as well, and then the crews really do just train together. So we get to know each other very well. We get to know each other's families. We get to know each other's likes, dislikes. So really there's not an awful lot of secrets left by the time you are having to share absolutely everything later on. The day of the launch, you have to check that your spacesuit's been put on properly. Spacesuit that's been made to measure. You know, I've never had a made-to-measure suit in my life before or since, and here was the first one I'd got. It's made a number of different layers. The outside layer that you see is really just for strength. In fact, you can see this very spacesuit in the Science Museum. I see Doug Millard come this afternoon. Nice to see you, Doug. Doug's curator of the Space Gallery and other things in the Science Museum. So Doug's taking good care of my spacesuit, so do go and have a look if you'd like to see it. The outside layer is for strength, and the inside layer is a rubbery layer that does actually seal it. Because again, this is our just in case. We want to breathe air inside the spacecraft. I was not going to go out and do a spacewalk. Tolya did, so he'll tell you a bit more about that later on. But my job was to work inside the spacecraft, breathing the air that we had inside the spacecraft. But maybe, just in case that air leaked out somehow, then I would need that suit. I would need to close that helmet properly. And really properly, because my life was going to depend on that possibly. So we make sure that it has been put on properly, that the seal and the stomach, you climb into it through this great big hole in the stomach, and then do up a number of different ties to make sure it's sealed properly. And then finally you pull the helmet on, you have your gloves on as well, and that gives you the final seal. And we will inflate that suit there, sitting in that seat, just the same seat that's going to be on top of the rocket waiting for me to get into it. We inflate the suit, make sure that it is going to keep that air pressure inside it. Finally, after all of that training, it was 18 months of training altogether for 8 days in space. It's a lot of training, isn't it, just for 8 days? But I'm here to tell the story, so it worked. The actual spacecraft itself is a very small part of that rocket. I mean, most of it is just engines full of fuel needed to get you into space. So you see the little spike on top? That contains some tiny little rockets that could, if necessary, pull us away from the launch pad if there was an emergency on the launch pad, and they have worked, they've saved 2 people's lives in the past. So if there's a fire or some other accident that means you've got to get out of there, you don't have the time possibly to get all the way out of your spacecraft, down the gantry, down the steps, and get away. But what you can do is your spacecraft can be pulled away from the rocket, leaving the accident behind, and it catapults you 2 kilometers down the road. So say it saved people's lives before, so we're very grateful for that. But just below that spike, in the little white bit that you see, that's where our Soyuz spacecraft is. I talked to a Dutch astronaut before, just after he flew, and he flew with NASA. He said that on the day of his launch, there were 7 of them flying in the space shuttle, and they have a while to wait on the top of the gantry, looking down at all the people before they get in one by one into the shuttle. And he said that was the first time, really, that they'd actually considered what was their chances of coming back alive. because prior to that, they'd all been understanding that there's not been enough people really in space to make a good statistical analysis on what are your chances of coming back alive. But that was when they really thought about it, and they were asking each other, if you went and somebody told you you'd get 90% chance of coming back alive, would you? Yeah, probably. What if it were 50? Would you then? And they all started to talk about that and where their different cut-offs would be. I knew that there was a chance I would not make it, but I also knew that there was a very strong chance I would. And by this time, I trusted not only Tolya as my commander and Sergei as my engineer, but I trusted every single one of those engineers, technicians, scientists who had worked out the trajectory of that spacecraft, who had worked out exactly where those nuts and bolts had to go in to make sure that the flight was going to be safe. And it's that trust that does bond people, and I think it bonds people forever, which is why Tolya and I, 21 years later, are still happy to come and talk to you today. This is what it was actually like inside that spacecraft, very much like the old Soyuz, the old Apollo spacecrafts. The third sort of black bit on the right-hand side of the picture here is the third seat. But you can see there's not a lot of room. Elbows overlap vertically. It's hard work. You can see the control panel up the front here. By the time you're strapped in, you're having to push buttons on the control panel with a stick because you can't actually reach it with your spacesuit itself. You've got gloves which are difficult to work in. You're strapped in an hour and a half before the launch. You remain strapped in for an hour and a half after the launch. It's hot. I lost 2 liters of sweat, so I had to dry the spacesuit afterwards. It's not the most glamorous job in the world, but I hope you'll agree that after we've finished talking to you today, it is probably, well, I think, the most fun job in the world to have. So the three of us, having sat in these seats, waited for the launch, going through all the checks that we needed to do, there was no real countdown. Perhaps you might imagine a Russian countdown, 10, 9, 8, but it's not that at all. The time just ticks by. You go through the checks, and then somebody says, the rockets are working. And then you feel that vibration. You start to hear the noise, and you feel, but oh so slowly at first. I mean, you do this, thrust has to build up. And I still find it incredible that all we're doing, if I just go back one picture, all we're doing is blowing out those gases out of the back. They're burning gases because we're burning up the fuel to create a lot of gases very fast. But that's all we're doing. I mean, Newton's third law, Newton, one of the early members of this Royal Society, a fellow of the Royal Society, I just wonder what he would really think if he were able to experience that third law for himself in such tremendous situation. But that's all we're doing. The gases coming out of the back gives us the acceleration we need to go forward. And of course, the more fuel you burn, the more gases you push out the back, and the faster you move. So you feel that acceleration. You are pushed back into your seat. But the G-forces are lumpy and bumpy. It's not a sort of smooth transition because you've got different rocket stages. And you can imagine as you're burning up fuel, the rocket's getting lighter so it can go faster. But then you jettison that rocket stage, and then the next one kicks in. So there are 3 different stages altogether. We had a maximum of 3.5 G just during that launch there. So, multiply your weight by 3.5, you do feel incredibly heavy. So everything was heavier, but we were lying back, in that position that you saw as I checked my suit. So the G-forces go chest to back. So they're not head to foot. So you don't lose blood from your brain. You're not more likely to black out that way. Instead, chest to back, you just push back down into your seat. Your rib cage feels a bit heavier, so your breathing is a bit more laboured. But other than that, it's relatively easy. And actually, our landing in Soyuz was going to give us 4.5 G. So it's harder coming back on a Soyuz spacecraft than it is actually during the launch. But again, we were trained and we were fit, so there was no problem for any of us. And we did eventually make it up there. And once we were unstrapped from those seats, Tolya and I could get off our spacesuits, put on these flight suits, and really just start to enjoy this feeling of weightlessness. It really doesn't matter which way round you are, and you very quickly get used to that. It seems to be a very natural feeling. You don't need weight. You forget what it's like, to actually sit down, to feel the weight of yourself on the seat. When you stand up, you feel a pressure beneath your feet, but you forget what that's like. You don't need it. It is really a natural feeling. And we did really just have a great fun time. It's still feeling weightless, though. I still talk about feeling weightless, and I hope I don't labour this too much, because, of course, we are not weightless in the truest sense, because gravity very much is still there. We're feeling weightless because, just like in the aircraft in the training, We are falling, no longer accelerating away from the Earth, the rocket fuel having been used up totally. We are now falling back. But instead of falling down towards the Earth's surface, because we are going along so fast, I mean, this is doing 8 kilometers a second. That's 18,000 miles an hour at this stage. You go from one part of London to the other part, west to east, in 5 seconds. It's gone. Yeah? You go over Africa. That takes 20 minutes. But the Pacific Ocean takes 40 minutes. You know, it's when you think about that, you realize the little bit of the Earth that I know, how I think I know a bit about, there's an awful lot more out there that I know absolutely nothing about. How much more there is for every single one of us here in this room to discover. But we were feeling weightless because we were falling. And we were falling, but falling around the Earth. As we went along so fast, the Earth's surface curved away below us, and so we just fell around the Earth. And that's all I did for 8 days, was just to fall around the Earth. Came back after my space flight, went back into my local coffee shop, and they'd made a small advert in the local newspaper congratulating me on my space flight and saying if I would like to come in for a free cup of coffee, then I would be very welcome. So I came in and put my advert and said, thank you, it's lovely to see you again. Can I have a free cup of coffee? How nice. And they said, yeah, fabulous. Do come tell us all about it. Where did you go? I said, well, I went round the Earth. I said, oh, didn't you go to the moon? Mars? Just round the Earth. Oh, that was it. That was my free cup of coffee. But we orbited the Earth for 2 days inside Soyuz before we approached the space station. This was the Mir space station, at this particular time made up of 3 large modules. And you can see there a Soyuz spacecraft already docked onto that opposite end. So the 2 people up there, that was their spacecraft. We approached the space station in our spacecraft and would have docked onto this central docking port here. You always dock onto a middle docking port there so that you don't start spinning the space station around as you make any sort of slight imperfection in your movement towards it. And then after the docking, later on when I had left the spacecraft, I was going to come back to Earth in the old spacecraft, you know, the one that had taken the people up before me, leaving behind Tolya and Sergei in space. And then they would undock their spacecraft, move around and reposition it, ready for the next spacecraft to come and dock. A tremendous space station. I mean, it's not in existence anymore, but the International Space Station is very much built on the same kind of designs. Different modules that you can take up in bits, because we still are relying on basic rocket technology to get these things into space. And you join them together like great big lumps of jigsaw. But each of these modules is 20 meters long. Internal diameter is about sort of 2.5 meters, external about 4 meters. So it means that, you know, you can put your arms out sideways, and you can just about not touch either wall. So you can just be in free space and float there. And it is the most amazing feeling. I mean, just feeling that nothingness around you, getting used to the idea that, yes, you can just push off from one wall because there is nothing to stop you moving until you hit the wall on the other side. But tremendous amount of things that you can do in space because of that. My experiments I took up were a real combination of things, which is lovely for me as a chemist to be able to do a mixture of physical, chemical, biological experiments. In the black box, I've got some chlorophyll. So we're looking at really how green plants keep alive and the kind of chemistry that goes on with green plants. I've got some seeds in these canisters under my arms. So we're very interested in the way plants start to germinate if you put them in different magnetic fields. Of course, being where we were in space, going through the normal magnetic fields of the Earth so frequently, so it was messing up their normal, the normal static magnetic field that they would feel. And so we're putting magnets in different positions around them and looking at how that affects their growth. And I've got some potato roots in my right hand there. So we're very interested in growing fruit and vegetables in space. So really, so far, we've been very unsuccessful at really propagating fruit and growing our own food like that. And even back then, so there's been a long history of trying to do that, understanding how those cells change in the roots particularly. The tiny sort of the very heavy, should I say, full of mass particles in each cell that show the root which way is down, so that the root does actually know which way to grow. Of course, they're not experiencing the same kind of forces in space like this, so the roots grow all over the place. The green shoots still grow towards the light wherever you put the green shoots. Even after a couple of hours, this had been in the dark for 2 days in Soyuz. After arriving on the space station, my job was to find a free light. So there aren't many free spaces on board the space station at all. It's all full of sort of equipment and clutter, really. But I found a light, and within 2 hours, every single green shoot had turned around and was going straight towards that light. But of course, the roots were still growing in every which direction they chose, some even outside of the medium that they were trying to grow in. So amazing things. Crystals. So as a chemist, I love growing crystals. And to be able to grow crystals of protein like luciferase, you can't grow these crystals big enough on Earth, because as you start to cool the solution that they're growing in, you get convection currents. Warm air rises, warm bits of solution rise, cool bits of solution fall. Happens normally on Earth. And as that circulation current moves in your crystal, it affects the way these long, floppy protein molecules are actually trying to crystallize. So they don't form big crystals on Earth. But feeling weightless, you can grow lovely big crystals of luciferase. Once they're hard, solid, bring them back to Earth, X-ray diffraction, and then you know exactly where the different parts of those molecules are within that crystal. Brings you a much better understanding of what that molecule's about, and ultimately medicines and helping people's lives just by being able to understand. So this is really all about science, isn't it? It's about what science can do for us in the long run. So apart from experiments, of course, we had to survive in order just to do those, and eating was a key part of that, and great fun part of it as well. Very Russian food, because I had a Russian Soviet space station. So we've got a tin of fish here, and you can open the lid of that fish tin, and the fish doesn't suddenly float out, because, of course, it's not going to move until something makes it move. It's quite sticky. It stays where it is in the tin. You put your fork in. Hope you can see the string that's attaching my fork to the table so that I don't lose it. Tolly is being very brave with his spoon, of course. Being commander, he can do what he likes, whereas I'm sticking to the rules. But it's very easy. You put your fork into your mouth. The sticky fish stays stuck to the fork, and then you chew it and you swallow it. And it's the muscles, of course, it's that sort of peristaltic action that squeezes the food into your stomach and all the way through your digestive system. So you don't even need gravity for that. But it does help on Earth. There is a reason why our mouths are at one end and everything else is down at the other end. So we have a lot of fibre in space, a lot of fibre that we have to eat every day. So dried fruit, for instance. So that's one of the few things that we are absolutely stipulated we have to eat every day. A lot of prunes, just to keep all the bowel movements, well, the bowel movements moving, should I say. Drinking, something a bit fun. This is a packet of coffee. You could have a cup, I suppose. You could have your glass of water in space. You could somehow get the water in there, and if you're careful, it would stay there, because you could then tip up that glass and nothing would make the water come out. So, and you could have a cup of coffee, but you couldn't really get a drink out of it because it would just be stuck inside the cup. So you have the packets. Not only do they keep everything contained for you, but it means you can actually get a drink by opening the spout on top and then just squeezing that packet and sucking like through a straw. We had packets of fruit juice. More fun was the water, because we could be a little bit naughty with the water. So we had a canister of water. You could pressurize it, very simple hand pump, and then a pipe leading towards, well, we were supposed to put our own mouthpiece that we would keep in our pockets onto the end of this pipe. And then you would release the valve, and a bit of water would come out, and ideally it would just come into your mouth, and then you could swallow it. But quite often your mouthpiece wasn't where you last remembered it, and anyway, it was an awful lot more fun to hold the pipe over here and just sort of squirt a bit of water, and you would find a blob of water coming, vibrating slowly towards you, and you could just sort of take it. Or even better, you could squirt it at somebody else. Before I go on to something to play with, let me go back to the drinking, because I did want to go on one bit further from all of this eating and drinking, and I didn't put a slide in. I was a bit concerned about coming to the Royal Society. I've never spoken in the Royal Society before, Martin, so I do hope you will allow me just this one piece of, could be a minor indiscretion, but I know there's some people from where I work now, the National Physical Laboratory, who have probably only come here today to see me talk, because I did tell them that I might just mention the toilet. So I think in the interests of some of the people here, I do need to tell you how the toilet works, because, of course, after all of this drinking, there is something you do have to do, and we all have to do it. Now, on board the space station, we did have a door. On board Soyuz, we didn't. So this is what I mean by we did do everything together. But, you know, we have a toilet, and we have a toilet that flushes. Wonderful, but not with water. And the reason why, I'm sure you'll find out shortly why I'm talking about this so enthusiastically, is because the toilet is one of the most ingenious ways of using technology that probably has ever been invented. You flush your toilet with air. So really it's just like a great big funnel. You turn on the switch and air starts to be sucked through this funnel. Everything you do around the top of this funnel gets sucked away. It's all nice and clean and no smells. But you don't want to waste anything if you're in space. And the Russians have developed the most ingenious way of making sure that they recycle everything. They collect everything in the toilet through a series of filters, osmosis, and then adding silver ions. You can clean that into water that is so clean, you can drink it. And while it's quite possible to drink, the psychologists on Earth say, well, yes, you have got water there, but actually, we'd rather you didn't drink it if you don't, you know, it makes you feel better if perhaps you don't think you're drinking what you put into the toilet just a few days before. So instead, we'll give you some water to take up with you. We've got some spare capacity. Instead, you can use that water for something else. So you could use it to water your plants with. Or, and this is where I think it's really clever, you can use it to create something else that you really do need. Because, of course, water contains hydrogen and oxygen. And we were up there quite happily breathing away, using up a load of oxygen. And while we did have other methods of getting oxygen, one very ingenious way is by collecting the water from the toilet, sending electric current through that, so you electrolyze the water, you separate your hydrogen from your oxygen. Now, we didn't need the hydrogen, so we did actually vent that into space. But the oxygen, we mixed with the rest of the air. And so instead of drinking, I just breathed in what I'd put into the toilet a few days before. But a very ingenious thing to do. Now, the hydrogen, while it was wasted then, one of the things that I know the European Space Agency is looking into at the moment is recycling that hydrogen. So, I mean, wouldn't it be fab to be able to combine that hydrogen, let's say with the carbon dioxide that's collected on filters of lithium hydroxide, they soak up all the carbon dioxide that we breathe out. So if you could collect that carbon dioxide and this hydrogen, combine those, you've got carbohydrates. So you could say that's the most recycled biscuit that there ever has been. But that's what I'm really waiting to see in space one day. So I've gone back to now. We did have some fun as well. Part of all this boring stuff about going to the toilet and eating and drinking, doing experiments, well, we needed to have a bit of R&R. So we had a guitar, we had a small keyboard. People have composed their own songs in space. Just a normal lifestyle in some respects, except that the guitar had to be strapped with a great big bungee strap to stop the guitar from floating around in the space station. Because I say floating around, you could argue, well, what's going to make it move unless you actually make it move? Because you could just let go of that guitar and do what some of the original Space Lab people used to do for the Americans. They had a great big space station, much bigger in terms of internal dimensions than Mir was. And so they could actually just somehow get themselves in the middle of the space station. Now, it was harder to do if you do it on your own because you have to push off from one surface and you do actually just keep going till you hit another surface. But they used to play tricks on each other, and when one of them was asleep, the other two would very carefully get this poor old astronaut and position him in the middle, opposite sides of him, and then just gradually let him go and wait till he wakes up. And there you are, stranded in the middle of this space station. You put your arms out in front of you and your body moves backwards a bit. You put your arms backwards and your body moves forwards a bit. You can do this constantly. You can twist about, but you can't actually move from one part to another unless you really blow out or do something else the other way. So, but that's the only way of actually moving. So the guitar, you could argue, why would that not just stay exactly where it was? Well, of course, one of the problems of not having any convection in space, although it's very nice for growing your protein crystals, the problem is that if you just stay in one position there and you breathe out all of this air with quite a bit of carbon dioxide in it, eventually you build up such a concentration of carbon dioxide around you that you end up suffocating in your own breath. So you have to have fans circulating the air constantly. It keeps the You know, the clean air coming towards your face with more oxygen in it takes away that carbon dioxide, and it also means that you can filter out a load of stuff, filter out a load of dust and other particulates. At the end of the day, I had a bedroom to go to sleep in. My sleeping bag there attached to the wall, because of course you don't need to actually lie down to go to sleep in space. In fact, I do remember Sergei slept on the ceiling outside my bedroom, and I don't remember where Tolya slept. So I'm just going to ask him, Tolya, где ты спал? Where did you sleep? Где ты спал?
Я спал отдельно от тебя, другой коричневый.
So he was saying just on the opposite side. But yeah, you don't actually need a bed to lie down on. My sleeping bag, again, attached so that I wouldn't actually sort of float off in my sleeping bag. The sleeping bag not only kept me warm, but kept me in one place. The black circle in the middle there is my bedroom window. Black because it happened to be dark when I took the photograph. But some of the most amazing sights I've ever seen I took through that bedroom window. This is looking westwards, because the sun is setting, so being reflected from the sea. Just going over then the west coast, the west part of the United Kingdom. So you can see Ireland there, and Cornwall, yeah, and the southwestern tip of Wales. Thanks, Martin. That's Cornwall, the tip of Cornwall, yeah. And this is a sort of southwestern tip of Wales here. I don't have a huge number of photographs of the United Kingdom, sadly. So I flew for 8 days at the end of May, and the United Kingdom was very cloudy for 8 days at the end of May. This is Baja California, a place that was often not very cloudy at all, and very typical of how you sort of see the colours. This sort of brick red, brown kind of colour. Not the green and pleasant land I'd expected to see of the United Kingdom, of England, but yeah, we're more of a muddy brown colour, really. But yeah, Baja California, and actually, some parts of these desert roads, the desert places, you can see the roads that cross the desert. You see things in long, straight lines, because your eye tends to follow very unnatural straight lines. Yeah, the nature is very, very messy. But the sort of the human-made objects, straight lines of the roads, you could see the wakes of ships. Not the ship itself, but as the ship had travelled through the water. So you can see ships travelling vastly toward all these ships going in and out of the Straits of Gibraltar. Yeah? You can see condensation trails of aircraft. So just by looking down at the Earth, you know exactly where you are, because Europe has all of these sort of contrails all over the place. Japan, everything's just going in towards one place in Tokyo. And of course, the US, things are going to the East Coast and the West Coast. And the Southern Hemisphere is almost devoid of all of these condensation trails. Australia's got a few, but really it does show you where all of this activity is taking place. Something we could see 16 times a day was the sunrise and the sunset. You know, none of us ever got tired of watching the Earth. I say 16 times a day because we were going around the Earth 16 times every Earth day. You know, so at that particular time, depending on the orbit, so sometimes you do get an orbit or two where you are in total darkness. But while I was there, we had 16 periods of light and 16 periods of dark in each 24 hours. So, of course, you do just base yourself on whatever time your watch says, that's what time it is. And our watches were set to time in mission control in Moscow. So we went to bed at, well, we were supposed to go to bed at 10:30 when it was mission control 10:30 in Moscow. All too soon, it was time for me to come back to Earth. And, well, this is the spacecraft having landed. 2 people on top are about to drag us out from the inside. It's a strange feeling coming back to Earth, because having felt weightless for so long, well, it's only 8 days, but it seemed a long time to me, then you have to get used to feeling heavy again. We come back to Earth in exactly the opposite way from the way we went into space. We still burn up fuel, we still push it out of rockets, but instead of pushing it out backwards, we push out our fuel this time forwards. That decelerates us enough so that we can enter the atmosphere. Then that decelerates you even more. I mean, that really is where you get the buffeting of the different layers of atmosphere, and you can see a plasma. Now, this is just the upper layers of the atmosphere. They get hot, and they ionize. And you can see this gradually. It starts with kind of an orangey color, and then it builds up through yellow to a bright white. I looked outside of the window, and I could see the outside surface of the spacecraft melting and bubbling away from that window. I knew it was supposed to melt, but even so... But even this is, you can imagine all of these bits of science that you sort of pull on from different parts of your life. It's designed to melt because the latent heat of melting, by actually taking in heat from the surrounding to melt it, rather than that heat rising the temperature, your temperature doesn't rise up as much as it otherwise would. So again, really ingenious thing to do. So you can see how blackened and charred it is because it actually kept us cooler by doing so. But then 1.5 meters above the ground, so having opened our parachutes first, should I say, but 1.5 meters above the ground, retro rockets fired, and that cushioned the landing. But it was windy. So because everything in space works fine, it's when you get back down to Earth and the weather that creates the problem. So we still had our parachutes there, and the parachutes were sort of being dragged along with the wind. So as we operated our retro rockets, instead of working directly perpendicular to the ground, they operated sideways. So we actually ended up spinning head over heels a few times, and we ended up on our sides. Now, I was lucky. I was on the top. The commander was in the middle, and the poor engineer was on the bottom. And all the stuff that we'd brought back that we thought we had nicely secured, well, it was secure as far as it could be in weightless conditions, but with all of this buffeting and bumping around, well, it became unsecure. And I do remember, we ended up sitting, I was there on my side, still strapped into the seat, and the first thing you say is, you all right? Yeah, I'm okay. You okay? Yeah, we're all right. And then you sort of can look around, and this poor guy was totally covered in all of the bits and things that we'd brought back, all of our experiments and everything else, the books that we were working from. But we'd come back, and we were safe. We had come back, but Tolya hadn't. I'd left Tolya behind on board the space station. Tolya and Sergei were there for what was supposed to be another 6 months, although for Sergei it ended up being more like 10 months. And they carried on with their work on board that space station. One of the hardest things I did was say goodbye to Tolya and Sergei in space. And I think Tolya is going to talk a little bit about that and about what he did in space after I left. So I'll pass you on to Tolya just now.
So thank you very much. I'm sure there will be lots of questions. И теперь I will say a few words in Russian for our guest. Теперь для нас очень большая честь, что вы здесь рассказать о вашем полете в космосе. Пожалуйста.
Здравствуйте, уважаемые дамы и господа.
Good evening, dear ladies and gentlemen.
Я очень рад приветствовать вас в этом зале.
I'm very happy to welcome you, all of you in this room.
Мне сказали, что чемпионат Уимблдона заканчивается, финальный матч сегодня. Я думал, что вы все там будете, а вы пришли космос слушать. Спасибо большое.
I was told that today is the Wimbledon Cup final, and I thought that you would all go and see it, but you came here.
Но я хочу поблагодарить Джулию Кнайтс, посла Тима Барроу и Марину Соколову, которые сделали возможным мое присутствие здесь и мою встречу с Хелен через 21 год.
And I would like to take this opportunity to particularly say thanks to Julie and to His Excellency Ambassador Barrett and Marina Sokolova, who made it possible for me to be here and in so many years after we made friends to meet Helen again.
Я хочу низко поклониться вам. Спасибо большое.
Thank you very much indeed.
Потому что 20 лет после нашего полета у нас не было возможности встретиться с Хелен в Лондоне. Я бывал в Лондоне, но первый раз я приглашен как космонавт, как астронавт, который работал вместе с Хелен.
Because in those 20 years we never had an opportunity to see each other, irrespective of many opportunities that might have presented themselves in mutual contacts between UK and Russia. And now, after so many years, I received this invitation to come over here, and that is why I'm very happy to see her.
Это очень хороший знак. Вы знаете, что 2 года назад создано космическое агентство Британии, и мы реально начинаем сотрудничество. Было по инициативе посольства России в Москве организован год космоса Россия и Британия, и очень хорошие достигнутые результаты. И я надеюсь, что мы будем в дальнейшем наращивать наше сотрудничество.
And so this is really a good omen, because a British space agency was recently created, and so we're starting this cooperation as initiated by the UK Embassy in Moscow. The Russian-UK Space Year was announced, and so I'm very much hopeful that we will continue now cooperating very permanently.
Я всегда очень сожалел о том, что Британия исследует космос без пилотируемых полетов. И очень важно для того, чтобы почувствовать и увидеть то, что многие страны уже испытали, что Британия тоже придет со своим космонавтом, кроме Хелен, в космос.
It has always been a bit of a regret on my part that the United Kingdom was more doing space exploration in terms of unmanned flights. And so I thought in those many years ago that Helen would be the person who would sort of create this consistency of such explorations in the future, which basically didn't happen. She remains up till the present day the only sort of British lady who ventured out there, but hopefully there will be many more others to follow suit.
Вы знаете, что сегодня в мире 525 космонавтов из 35 стран. И только один космонавт из Великобритании – это Хелен Шарман. Да, мы знаем, что есть еще 6 космонавтов, которые родились в Великобритании и летали с американцами. И один космонавт Марс Шаттлворд летал с нами на нашу станцию, на совместную станцию международную космическую. Он также британец, но они получили образование и подготовку в других странах. Хелен у нас единственный человек, который достойно представил Британию. Она блестяще выполнила всю программу экспериментов. Она великолепно работала. И нам, как мужчинам, было приятно за этим наблюдать. Она нам добавила много-много сил.
There are 525 astronauts from almost 35 countries, and only one astronaut from UK, Helen. We know that there are other 6 astronauts who were born in the UK, and they traveled on the US space flights. One of them joined us at our station, International Mir Space Station. He is also a Brit, but they were educated and were trained in other countries. So Helen is the only person who brilliantly performed the whole experimental program. She did a lot of excellent work, and we enjoyed watching her as, being males, and she presented us with many a great moment.
И я хочу сказать, что мне очень повезло среди многих командиров в отряде космонавтов, потому что я год готовился с японской девушкой Рёко Кикути, затем мы полгода готовились с Хелен Шарман, работал в космосе. Мне многие мужчины в отряде завидовали. Вот повезло Артсебарскому, летает с девушками, там, готовит девушек, живет с девушками, 3 дочери потом родил, 2 сына, и так далее. Но смысл все весь в том, что космос окрыляет, когда ты работаешь с прекрасными дамами.
I was very lucky in our astronaut team. It took me 12 months to get prepared and trained with a Japanese astronaut, and then 6 months with Helen. And many men in our team really were envious of me because they're saying, hey, you're spending so much time with lady astronauts and you are training Japanese lady, British lady. And no, I married and got 2 sons and 3 sons and 2 daughters. But what I want to say is that doing and preparing yourself for the space program really adds a lot of power and force.
Вот посмотрите, если собрать вместе время каждого астронавта и космонавта, которые работали на орбите, то за 51 год мы все космонавты налетали около 100 лет. Около 100 лет. И только 7 суток Хелен от Британии. Я думаю, что быстрыми шагами и темпами Британия будет работать. Как уже вы знаете, сейчас отобран один британский астронавт в Европейском космическом агентстве. Он готовится к полету в космос. И мы по-настоящему видим счастливых британцев, которые будут встречать своего очередного героя, который будет работать на Международной космической станции вместе с Европейским космическим агентством.
If one puts together the time that every astronaut spent in the orbit, then during these 51 years of history, all of the astronauts spent almost 100 man-years, and only 7 days Helen spent in the orbit. So I hope that now with this new program, and there's one new UK astronaut has already been selected as part of the European Space Agency program. He's preparing to fly, so we hope that the UK astronauts will join our ranks and will expand this particular range of time that will be added to the history of manned space flights.
Я очень сожалею, что у нас мало времени для того, чтобы мы могли общаться, поэтому я хочу показать некоторые отрывки из нашего фильма, который мы сняли вместе с Бременским институтом телевидения и радио, который был сделан в Германии. И этот фильм представлялся даже в Каннах. И некоторые эксперименты вы уже видели, и я хочу некоторые из них еще показать. То, что могли сделать только российские космонавты, нарушив порядок и правила, например, поджечь спичку, зажечь свечу и так далее.
I very much regret that I don't have too much time to speak to you and tell you, the biggest story. So I would like to show you a few fragments from the film which we did together with one of the German channels, and this is the film which was also presented at the Cannes Festival. Some of the episodes you have already seen, but I would like to replay them again and show you what the Russian astronauts, having violated some of the rules while lighting up a match and a candle on space, did just to let you have some fun.
Ну, для начала посмотрите, как космонавты подстригают друг друга. Это достаточно интересно и забавно.
First is the way the astronauts are giving each other a haircut. That is interesting.
Как вы видите, это пылесос, который очень шумит и летает в невесомости, как ему вздумается.
This is the misbehaving vacuum cleaner, which is doing the things that we're not expecting it to do.
Но пока космонавты подстригаются, я хочу сказать, что много-много интересного мы могли посмотреть в иллюминаторе, потому как вы можете себе представить, наша планета Земля — это вода, вода и вода, потому что 1/6 только суши, остальное вода. Как ни посмотришь в иллюминатор, это сплошная вода, вода, вода и вода. Хотя я по географии имел 5, но мне пришлось удивляться каждый раз, когда ты видишь, что Земля — это сплошная вода.
While they're enjoying themselves, I would like to comment by saying that there have been so many interesting things that we were able to see through the spacecraft window. You can imagine that Earth is just water. Now, plain water is just 1/6 of it is landmass, the rest of it is water. So no matter at which point in time you look through the window, you always see water. And I was really every time surprised to see that Earth is just nothing but water.
Мы немножко ускоримся. Это внешняя поверхность нашего комплекса, выходной люк для работы в открытом космосе.
And this is the outer surface of the craft, through which we walk out.
Вот обратите внимание, как необычно ведет себя в невесомости горящая спичка и зажженная свеча.
Please note how unexpected are the things that you see when you light up the match or a candle in space.
Я не думаю, что кто-нибудь еще, кроме русских космонавтов, мог бы вот такое себе позволить, нарушение правил и закона, инструкций на станции.
And I cannot imagine any other astronaut from any other country who would be so daring as to violate the rules and lit up a match in space.
Это вообще-то опасно. Пожар на станции был, очень серьезный пожар был, и пожар пришлось тушить всеми подручными средствами, и это была очень тяжелая ситуация для станции, потому что дыма очень было много, и невозможно было его удалить из станции, и фильтры не справлялись, и экипажу пришлось очень-очень тяжело.
And actually, once there really took place a fire on the station, and that was very much an unpleasant thing because there was a lot of smoke, and we had to extinguish it with basically everything that we could lay our hands on.
Мы работали на станции «Мир», где было более 100 космонавтов из 12 стран. А сегодня на Международной космической станции побывало уже очень большое количество космонавтов. Всего американских астронавтов 332 астронавта, российских и советских космонавтов 113. Из них многие по 2-3 раза летали в космос. И если брать рекорды все по продолжительности полетов и по количеству, по времени совокупно, то, конечно, Россия здесь на первом месте. Такой космонавт, как Валерий Поляков, работал в космосе 1 год и 3 месяца. Такой космонавт, как, например, Сергей Григорьев, за 6 полетов пробыл в космосе 803 дня. Это очень большие достижения. И опыт Полякова показал, что можно за период 1 год и 3 месяца слетать к Марсу и обратно.
We are here on the Mir station, and there have been over 100 astronauts from 12 countries that visited it. But today, the International Space Station has already been visited by a great number of astronauts. 332 from the US, 113 Russian and Soviet astronauts, out of which many visited the space station twice. If you take a look at the record in terms of the length and the duration of spending time in space, Russia certainly is in the first place. Valery Polyakov, for example, for almost 2 years and 1 month. Sergei Krikalev He spent 803 days in space, which is really very, very long. And so Poliakov's experience shows that within 1 year and 3 months, one can travel to Mars and back to Earth 3 times.
Но я убежден, что космос можно осваивать только совместными усилиями многих-многих государств. И этому пример, настоящий пример, это Международная космическая станция, которая на сегодня уже собрана практически полностью. Ее масса достигает более 400 тонн. Вместе с пристыкованным шаттлом эта масса была более чем 500 тонн. И это все вот летает у нас над головой постоянно. И это достаточно огромнейшее сооружение, которое вызывает большое уважение. И мы надеемся, что к этим работам станции, по Международной космической станции, в ближайшее время в пилотируемом режиме подключится и Британия.
So I am deeply convinced that space is something that can be explored only through a joint effort by many different nations. And so the International Space Station is almost completely assembled. It weighs more than 400 tons. With a docked shuttle, it weighs more than 500 tons. And so you can imagine that this construction is flying over us continuously. And this is really a kind of a space edifice that makes us feel very respectful. So we are very hopeful that in some immediate future, this international effort would also be joined by United Kingdom.
Вот я хотел сейчас показать, что кроме основной работы, которую мы выполняли на станции, у нас еще были побочные задачи как-то рекламного характера. И, например, Coca-Cola нас попросила, чтобы мы показали, как мы выпиваем в космосе именно Coca-Colу, специально приготовленную для нашего полета. Ну и, естественно, тогда контрактов никаких не было, и нам ребята сказали, американцы в том числе сказали: ребята, покажите, снимите на пленку, мы ваши семьи Кока-Колы завалим в буквальном смысле. Но, к сожалению, когда мы эту всю работу сделали, сняли, контракта не было, даже по одной бутылке мы Кока-Колу не получили. Вот уже 21 год жду, что хоть бутылочку Кока-Колы, Кока-Колу нам поставят все-таки. Вот, пожалуйста, посмотрите.
In terms of the work, apart from the basic ones that we were doing, we did some advertising work. For example, Coca-Cola asked us to show how we, being on the space station, are drinking Coca-Cola, specially packaged, for us certainly. But we didn't have any contract, and so our friends and Americans also told us, yes, you just make a footage, once you give it to us, we will drown you in Coca-Cola. But unfortunately, we did this work, and there was no contract, and so during these 21 years, I've been waiting to get at least one free bottle of Coca-Cola.
А здесь я хотел показать, чтобы вы увидели, как Хелен вернулась домой после полета в космос, как ее встречали, как она великолепно себя чувствовала. Она выполнила программу полностью. Посмотрите, какое счастье, и как мы ее любили, как мы берегли ее там. И самое главное, что когда мы улетали, мне первый космонавт, который вышел в это космическое пространство, показал кулак, сказал: Толя, тебе поручаю, Хелен, ни пальцем, чтобы никто не трогал, держи вот так всех, никому, там они полгода, ты, говорит, вот так, сам за не отвечаешь. И я задачу выполнил, обещал ему, Леону, и то все решил, вот Хелен жива-здорова, вернулась на Землю.
So, you see, I wanted to show you also this footage, how Helen came back, how really great she felt. She completed the program 100%. You can see, how happy she was. We really cherished her so much. And the most important thing, the first astronauts who, got communications, to me, via satellite, he shook his fist at me and said, you just, watch over her, make sure that she's 100% safe. And so I promised to him that she will be fully intact, and so you can see that Helen here is quite all right, alive and kicking, and back on Earth talking to us.
Но в завершение хочу сказать, что благодаря Михаилу Сергеевичу Горбачеву наш полет состоялся, потому что проект Juno был приостановлен, и Горбачев лично принял решение, чтобы наш полет выполнила Хелен. И спасибо ему большое, потому что нам удалось все-таки выполнить программу экспериментов, но уже, как говорят, за совместную работу. И вот Горбачев вышел к нам на связь, и мы действительно были счастливы, потому что благодаря ему этот полет состоялся. Мы с Хелен до сих пор дружим.
Вы слышите меня? Да, слушаю. Пожалуйста. Михаил Сергеевич, добрый вечер. Добрый вечер. Кто у телефона? Кто на связи? Экипаж орбитального комплекса «Мир» совместного полета Советской Великобритании приветствует вас. Ну, я сердечно рад этой встрече, такому огромному событию. В общем, поздравляю вас. Спасибо. Спасибо. Чем вы сейчас заняты? Готовимся ужинать. О,
This is the voice of
если бы
Gorbachev.
чуть позже, то, наверное, можно было бы, так сказать, вместе присоединиться. Да. Готовимся.
Сейчас
So Anatoly is trying to say that he is very grateful to Gorbachev because thanks to him the program basically carried on because it was coming to a completion sort of, but it was Gorbachev's decision that Helen should fly and that the program should be continued in as far as its pre-agreed, previously planned schedule was supposed to take place. So thanks to Gorbachev, Helen was able to come to us and, we made friends.
Ну, на этом надо закончить. Я не буду показывать наши военные эксперименты, это уже ни к чему. Мы теперь друзья навеки. Спасибо вам большое и счастья вам, благополучия, процветания, космического здоровья.
I'm not going to show you our military experience because, although we're already friends, but, I don't think it's really worth, showing them. So I would wish you the spaceman kind of health and stay all right.
Спасибо большое. Спасибо.
Большое вам спасибо. Thank you very much. I should say that although I've never been in space, I have cleaned my hair with a vacuum cleaner. But it's quite strange. So now we have time for some questions from the audience. Please keep your questions short and show your hand to indicate if you'd like a question. So, gentleman here. Where there's a microphone, yes.
Sorry, hello, Andrei Korolev. You mentioned that in your belief, space exploration should be done by international state conglomerates, United Nations type things, Britain, US, Russia, China. But recently there was an interesting development where a private company, SpaceX, by Elon Musk, launched a spacecraft funded entirely by private money, and they have proven that it can be done. So we don't really need big state organizations running the space programs. So what do you think of that? What do you make of that? Is there any future for space, for private individuals, when you basically buy a ticket and fly to any place in this solar system, hopefully, maybe beyond, in the future? Thank you.
Андрей Королев, у вас фамилия замечательная. Вы знаете нашего Сергея Павловича Королева, задаете хороший вопрос. Но я могу сказать совершенно точно, что мы в космос в тех масштабах, о которых говорил Артур Кларк, а он говорил, что мы 1/100 не используем от космоса то, что мы можем от него брать. Мы должны совместными большими деньгами осваивать. Почему? Потому что даже сейчас ваша компания SpaceX, она получила гранты от НАСА на большие суммы, на $80 миллионов и более. И это видят в том, что люди могут создать. И дают такую возможность. Это частная компания, крупная компания, успешная компания. Она может сейчас конкурировать по массе выводимого груза и стоимость за этот груз с любыми государственными компаниями. Потому что, смотрите, на сегодня Китай какими семимильными шагами шагает? Да? Это государство, которое сейчас наибольшими темпами осваивает космос. И у них впереди будущее. Это государство, большое государство, может себе позволить. Но лучше, если мы будем космос осваивать все вместе. Безусловно, какие-то частные задачи могут решать и частные компании. Но это не будет возможным освоить, например, Луну или Марс для частной компании. Да в этом нет и смысла. Мы должны дружить вместе. Лучшие специалисты должны приходить в эту отрасль. Лучшие. В космос может полететь специалист любой профессии, но лучший в своем окружении. Лучший. Только лучшие люди могут там много дел переделать, что называется, одновременно.
It's really great that your namesake of Sergei Korolev, who in Russia stands as the father of the Russian and Soviet rocket science, and basically you should know that the scale of the space that Arthur Clarke was saying, that we don't even use 1/100th of the space that we can have as humanity, and we have to develop it by pulling our financial resources together. And the company that we're talking about received an enormous grant, $80 million worth. And that basically shows that people are able to do something alternatively. This is a big private company which can compete in terms of the payload mass and the cost that it can charge with any government company. And, for example, see the example of China, the giant leaps that it is taking in developing its space program. And currently this is the nation that is demonstrating the fastest pace in this development. And they have a lot of future, and only a big country, a big nation can afford to do so. But it definitely would be best for us to pull our effort together, because not everything is possible through a private effort. Because it really doesn't make sense in certain cases. We have to maintain our friendship, and the best experts should come into this industry, and a person who represents any sort of trade can come into space, into the space exploration, but only the best ones can, by putting their efforts together, can achieve the most.
Fine. So, more questions, particularly from the children, whether any of you would like to ask a question. So, okay, there's a question down here. So, hold it close to your...
How long did it take to build the actual spaceship?
The actual space station is built in bits. So I think the first part went in 1986. And I arrived in 1991, or 5 years later, to have 3 modules there. And then another one arrived shortly after I left the space station. So it can take many years. But were you thinking about the actual rocket spacecraft as well? It's a very good question. I think it's about 2.5 months. They always have a spare one in case there's a problem in space and you need to get rescued. Anatoly will correct me, I'm sure.
Я хочу спросить, а как тебя зовут? What is your name, please?
What's your name?
Miko.
Miko.
Мика, вот сейчас для тебя и для твоих ровесников хорошее время. В Британии очень здорово поставлена наука. Я видел своими глазами в прошлом году, когда был в Эдинбурге, был в Глазго, был в Оркне, видел, как детям преподают в школе, видел, какие есть возможности для того, чтобы познать мир. Пожалуйста, за вами будущее. Вы, может, будете быстрее строить ракеты и корабли, чем мы строили. Мы строили очень долго. Мы до сих пор строим станцию международную космическую, которую начали строить в 2000 году. Уже 12 лет строим. Может быть, ваши возможности будут лучше, поэтому дерзайте, учитесь, старайтесь, и вы будете строить быстрее корабли, будет лучше корабли, чем наши. У вас все будущее, мы будем только вам завидовать и мечтать о том, что вы добьетесь больше, чем мы.
So I think that for you and your friends and the kids of your age, it's a really great time, because I last year visited Glasgow, Orkney and Edinburgh, and I saw the way sciences are being taught at school, and I was able to see the kind of opportunity that children have to learn more about the world. And so the future is yours. You will be able to build the spacecraft faster. It took us so much time. We continue even now building the International Space Station, which was started back in 2000, so many years. So maybe you will have better opportunities. So you should dare, you should learn more, and ultimately we'll be building faster and better spacecraft than what we were able to do, and we will just be staying home watching you and feel envious.
So we have time for one more question. So there's a lady there.
I was just wondering how much you both missed Earth when you were out there. Did you think about Earth, or were you just so excited you were just thinking about space?
I remember, I mean, I was only in space for 8 days, so I think Anatoly will have a different perspective after being in space for 6 months. I don't think anybody really misses a lot of the things that we perhaps more assume. So you don't miss your hi-fi, your car, you don't miss the physical stuff. What you do miss are your family and your friends, and it's those relationships that people crave after a long time. And certainly when you're going over parts of the Earth where you know people, it's the people down there that you think about, not anything else. It's pizza. Do you want to also add to that?
Я могу добавить немножко, потому что реально на станции, когда мы работали на Мире, было очень и очень много работы. И мы выполняли некоторые эксперименты и наблюдения за счет сна. И было так много работы, действительно, что скучать было некогда. Но действительно, когда ты пролетаешь над Африкой ночью, ты видишь, как там грозовая деятельность, сколько там молний, там сверкает, там дождь идет, видно, что там... И вот не хватало земного запаха, шума дождя не хватало таких вот земных ощущений, не хватало близких людей, теплоты общения с близкими людьми и так далее. Но на самом деле работа и задача, которая стояла, это была важная идея, ответственная задача, ее нельзя было не выполнить, поэтому все было подчинено этому. А вот посмотреть иллюминатор практически не удавалось по-настоящему для себя, только для работы. Потому что, могу так сказать, вот, помогут мне в этом объяснить правильно, потому что мы работали по московскому времени, когда в Москве день, мы работаем с нашими специалистами, когда в Америке ночь, мы должны, по идее, были спать, но мы не спим, потому что когда там день, у нас ночь, мы должны смотреть все военные объекты, которые есть у нашего вероятного противника. Мы это делали, и вместо того, чтобы спать, мы работали, поэтому совсем не было времени скучать или там как-то. А надо было выполнять задачу. Мы это делали и делали успешно. И, между прочим, я даже воинское звание полковник получил досрочно за то, что не спал, а работал по ночам.
Well, I definitely would be able to elaborate on that. Realistically, when we spent time at the Mir station, there was so much work. And some of the experiments that we had to do and some of the observations that we were doing were done at the sake of sleep. And there was so many things to do that there was no time to miss anything. But, for example, when we were flying over Africa during the night, and it was possible to see how many thunders and lightning and the storms were, taking place over it, what we missed, indeed, were the smell of earth, the sound of rain. Basically, things which are so banal and mundane, and so we definitely missed our next of kin. But the work that we did, the goals that we had to achieve were very important, so everything was subjected to it. But to look through the window, we basically never did in terms of just watching and missing anything, only for the purposes of doing work. Because when there was day in Moscow, we had to work with the Moscow-based control people. When there was night in the United States, we supposedly were supposed to sleep. But we couldn't, because we had to observe all the military facilities that our theoretical adversary could have there. So there was basically no time to do anything but work. And so we were quite successful. And I should admit that I was promoted to the rank of colonel before term, specifically because I didn't sleep but did work during the night.
So one final question, very quickly.
I can't help but noticing that space exploration seems to have gone down in the priorities of world governments, aside from the private ventures. But the American Space Shuttle program was recently cancelled, and obviously we have, in the middle of a financial crisis, worries closer to home. But honestly, I know you'd be speaking as a biased party, but how important is space exploration to humanity? And what should we be doing to promote it?
I've spoken a lot today about the science that we can discover and ultimately enhance our lives because of. There's an argument that says, well, you can do more science with the same money if you do it on Earth, and that is true. But there are things you can't do on Earth that you can do in space. But that's only one side of it. There's another side of going to space, which is, Arthur C. Clarke said once, that an organism ceases to exist when it stops exploring, when it stops pushing its frontiers, its boundaries. And we've always explored on Earth. We've always tried to just go that little bit further. And I think it's part of our makeup. One day we will have to exist elsewhere because we won't have an Earth anymore. So that's something else. And there's one more reason why I think it's so fabulous to go into space, is that we do learn so much about ourselves by taking ourselves, even if it's just metaphorically by looking at pictures, from whatever type of spacecraft it is, whether it's got people on it or not, and looking back as a whole on the Earth. And for us to think about that and our place in the vast scheme of things doesn't do us any harm every now and again.
Добавить? Я думаю, что действительно развитие науки бывает больше финансируется, меньше финансируется. Может, сейчас какой-то спад маленький есть, но это не беда, потому что реально исследования космоса будут проходить еще с большими темпами. Тем более мы же подписали соглашение 2 года назад с Роскосмосом, британское космическое агентство, и обязательно есть финансирование. Оно сейчас есть, и будет его еще больше. С каждым годом будет больше финансирования. И поэтому не переживайте, на ваш век работы хватит, и денег хватит. Даже деньги, дело не в деньгах, дело вот в отношении к этому. Да, действительно, отношение к космосу люди привыкли, что и даже не думают, что это опасно. Но мы убеждены, космонавты, в том, что обязательно в ближайшем же будущем будут созданы новые космические корабли, в том числе и в России. И они будут летать снова к Луне. И будем готовиться к Марсу. После каких-нибудь 20 лет будут люди на Марсе, как мы планируем, это будет после 1935 года. Действительно так. Так что учитесь, старайтесь, будьте вежливы к самому себе, потому что так много информации сейчас идет к вам. Поток такой большой, очень трудно найти то, что вам нужно для будущей жизни. Будьте внимательны, не загружайте себя постоянными мыслями и информацией, которая вам никогда не понадобится. Поэтому я обращаюсь к детям в зале, которые здесь, наша надежда, наша опора, наше будущее. Пожалуйста, верьте, что космос – это будущее нашей планеты, это наше спасение. И нужно об этом никогда не забывать, и нужно об этом всегда говорить. И только тогда всем вместе, дружными усилиями мы сможем создать хорошую защиту для нашей планеты и от астероидной опасности, которая может нашу планету разрушить. И многие-многие другие опасности существуют, которые только космосом, только все вместе мы победим. Так что успех вам, дерзайте.
Indeed, in many instances, we see that some little funding is being extended for a space exploration program, but that would definitely pass, and I'm sure that it will pick up in terms of pace, particularly since 2 years ago the Russian Space Agency signed an agreement with the UK Space Agency, so there is already a program, and there will be more of things to do, and the funding is being allocated more and more with every year. So you shouldn't worry that you will also have a lot of things to do in terms of space. The most important thing is in terms of attitude. People have grown used to space things. They don't see any danger in it, but we, the astronauts, are convinced that in some very immediate future there will be new space aircraft built, including in Russia, and they will travel to Moon, and they will prepare to travel and fly to Mars. In some 20 years, we expect that humankind will land on Mars sometime after 2035. So you should learn, you should try, you should be very much aware of yourselves, because there is an enormous flow of information that is coming to you, disorienting yourself. So be very attentive. Don't overload yourself with information that you will never be able to use. So I'm calling upon children who are in this room, who represent our hope and our future. Please trust me that space is the future of our planet. This is the way we're going to be saved. Don't ever forget to say things like that. Only when we're together and through common effort we will create a proper protection for the planet from the asteroids, which can really create a lot of damage and they fall upon Earth. There are so many other dangers that come from space, and only together we'll be able to protect ourselves. So I wish you lots of luck.
Thank you. So finally, I would like to thank our colleagues from the Moscow Embassy again for organizing this lecture, and also say that I think we owe a debt to Mikhail Gorbachev for choosing two so excellent speakers to send up to space in the first place. And thank you very much for your wonderful lecture.